Hello and welcome to SciLux, the podcast where we talk about scientific developments and technological changes in Luxembourg. Today, actually, very special episode. I keep saying very special, but this is special because it's SciLux original. And we're talking more behind the scenes. And our guest is Max Kasel from Mäin Element. Hello, Max.
Hello, nice to be here.
I'm just imagining the beginnings of Max as a science journalist. So you are at school and you love science. Am I right?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say that I'm a journalist because I have too much respect for real journalists that do that. Let's say the common buzzword content creator.
You like that?
I know that a lot of people don't like it, but I can live better with content creator than journalists, to be honest.
Okay.
Because like we said, the respect for the job. But to come back to your question, no, I wasn't that much of a science guy. I even had a choice in the Luxembourgish school system that you can quit some lessons, and I quit science. So I don't want to say I hated it, but I couldn't understand it. And my grades weren't good enough to prove that I could understand it. And yeah, so that's the history. I was never a science guy and then came to it by accident.
Okay, so you're sitting there and somebody says, Max, we have this idea. Now you're going to talk to scientists. What do you feel?
I was a radio host in Luxembourg and learned a lot. And there I made also the connections to the two guys that worked later on at the Luxembourg Journal. And they asked me, hey, you produce podcasts in Heidelberg. Do you want to do it also in Luxembourg? And then I said, yes, of course. Let's do a podcast. And then they gave me the information, hey, it's a science podcast. I responded, but I'm not a science guy. I have not that much of knowledge of physical laws. And they said, yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for. And then this collaboration started.
One of the episodes that I had is with a mathematician who said, when we do outreach activities, when we meet the general public, we never say it's mathematics because they will run away. So it just reminded me that you don't say science and maybe Max will be in. Okay, so you said yes. Immediately.
After that was clear that it wasn't a mistake from them, maybe they already were too advanced in the project to say no at that moment. But
everybody interested in science already said no, so you were the last resort.
You had no time. After that was clear, everybody said, okay, let's do this. And I think it worked pretty well until now. So the people from science know that I'm not a scientist, so the conversations are different. And I try to highlight not only the science, but also the people behind the science. So I think that's also the biggest difference between our podcasts. So you go fully into science and I interview the people to get to know the people behind the science.
So in a way, it does sound easier for me somehow, but also more difficult. Because I know that the scientists that I interview, they don't necessarily have, their personal profile out there. So, if I Google, I can find all the latest articles they have written and I can prepare from that, but I can't really know that they are into music or they are into, I don't know what else that you discuss. How do you get to know all this?
It's sometimes a little bit difficult to find some things. I think you have to look for other sources that are not much science related. Sometimes they go back to their school years. You look at old school pictures and see, oh, you played basketball when you were in high school. How was that like? I think those are the lucky treasures that you can find on the internet. Even though sometimes some researchers have deleted everything or hidden everything under pseudonyms or aliases. But then you can ask things out of the blue. Why are you doing this? Do people think it's cool what you do? So very naive questions, but I don't know if people always get what the people do. And if they do, I'm a researcher, they just say, oh, you're smarter than me and probably I don't know what you're doing. But I think at that moment, these naive questions can help a lot. And then you get whole new stories. The people come with anecdotes and then you can use these anecdotes to do the new link. So it's a lot of trial and error sometimes, but that's how the best interviews or the best talks with people come to life a little bit.
It reminds me very much of what I'm looking for when I'm interviewing the scientists, because, there is something I'm looking for. It's not only the research that we're discussing, but I want this sparkle in their eyes. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily that they're telling me the background story of, I got one scientist saying that, it was on a Saturday, I went to the lab and I discovered the thing, right? But it's just in general to see the process and the fun and the passion. And it's, I guess, a bit more difficult if you're just really doing pure discussion of science than if you say, okay, the passion is in your basketball playing, right? And then you kind of open them up and everything revolves around it. But we are starting to talk about prep, and I still want to circle back a bit for the beginnings. So you get contacted and they say, all right, you're going to talk. And do they tell you what's the audience? What was the plan for the audience? Who is the target audience of Mäin Element?
The target audience are people like you and me. So it's not a podcast for science people. Of course, everybody who does science.
Thank you for not calling me a science person.
Okay, that's hard. Okay,
it's all right. I accept it. I actually like that.
But it's not only for the science community. That's what I wanted to say. It's for people maybe like me who choose not to follow the path of science, but do something else, but are interested in it, but don't get it. So I think that's a good description. It's also to prove the point that a lot of science is done in Luxembourg, that a lot of cool science is done in Luxembourg, and that not every scientist is a Sheldon Cooper. But like I said, they play basketball, they go to parties, they used to live in New York and were a model. There are a lot of biographies that nobody knows and a lot of stories that can be told.
Sure. So you said someone who is interested but doesn't get it. So you are interested in science.
Now I would say I'm interested in science.
So it's changed.
No, I wouldn't say that it has changed, because for me, science was at that age something different than it's today. At that age, it was physical laws to understand, to learn. It were chemical reactions that I didn't get, still elements and I've never heard of. I had to learn. And now it's much more of, hey, it's a solution for things that I learned that are existing now to solve complex problems. And even though I still don't get it, I would say that it's much more interesting now for me.
And for your friends as well? Because I would assume that probably the group of friends are similar people to you, also not very much into science. What do you tell them when you meet them? Guys, I'm making this amazing podcast about science. No, you probably don't say science.
I think it's different. I think they're also very interested, a little bit like me, like you said, but I don't want them to listen. Of course, it would be cool, but I don't want to force them to listen every episode. Sometimes I send specific episodes with specific scientists to people where I know, okay, they're interested in that field. For example, somebody who is a psychologist, I send them episodes about real psychological problems, and then of course they can decide if it's cool or not. But sometimes I'm even surprised that people come to me and say, hey, I listened to this and that episode, and I'm like, whoa, cool. And I'm very happy about it.
So as usual, listeners, in more or less the beginning of our show, we have a pop quiz question where our guest asks a question and then we solve it only at the end. So you have to listen to the whole thing.
Which world famous meal has been invented in Luxembourg? Is it A, the döner? Is it B, the chicken nugget? Or is it C, the tortellini?
Okay, good. So remember the answer only at the end of the podcast. Let's go then to your first episode. Because we're still at the beginning. So it's the first episode. Why this scientist, and how did you feel? Was it probably stressful in the beginning? Because you're, oh God, he's going to just go jargon on me. And what do I do then? Or you already were completely cool about it because it was a cool person?
Well, the first episode that we recorded wasn't the first episode that came out, to be honest. So the first episode that we recorded was immediately some kind of confrontation therapy because it was with Stefan Bordas,
who was also a guest on my show.
We know that he's a very, very kind person who has 1 million thoughts at a time. And it was very challenging because, of course, I had to do the podcast in another language. It was not Luxembourgish like I used to, or German, which I'm much stronger. But it was very philosophical, even though we talked about math. So I really was very skeptical to talk about mathematics, also very scared of it. But in the end, it was very personal. He opened up about things that he said, at least have never said before publicly. He was very critical also with the job of a scientist. And it was one of these episodes where you think, oh, okay, this might work, even though, like I said, I'm not a scientist, but we can open that new dimension of a person working in science. And yeah, I think it was clearly one of the key episodes to this podcast.
Yeah, I remember also contacting Stefan at a certain moment, and I actually got a whole list of subjects we could discuss. So I was thinking like, maybe it would be just a podcast with him, because it was all very interesting, because he's really a persona, we have to say. So, which is good and bad. Sometimes you have amazing people in front of you, but maybe they are more introvert. It's difficult to talk to them. So you have to kind of open them up. And sometimes you have people who are so talkative and have a million thoughts that you have to a bit stop them to kind of get somewhere, because you're getting everywhere, right?
What do you prefer?
I think the introverts, just because I know that if I work hard and I prepare well, I will get the material that nobody had before. Let's say. So I have a feeling of being on a uncharted grounds or whatever, you know, and I can feel that the person is also a bit surprised, because especially with the really, if I can say, geeky guests, sorry for that word, but I consider myself geek as well. You do tend to have either people who don't trust me. They're a bit like, you don't have a science degree. What are you doing here? Like, okay, I'm going to talk to you, but again, probably nothing cool is going to come out of it. And I can see step by step, she's like, oh, she's ready. She gets it. Wow, that's cool. And then you might get, slowly them saying things that they normally don't say, because they're just not used to that. And that's just super rewarding.
That's the gold.
Yeah. And you, what do you prefer?
I think I also prefer introverted guests, because you can, as you said, you can get stories that you have never heard before. Of course, you could get them stories too if you let people who talk a lot. But I think the moment of success, when you realize that a person opens up to you about something, that person trusts you at that moment and knows, okay, I tell this, please don't make me regret it. And in the end, they say, okay, I didn't regret it. I think that's a very, very cool feeling, but also the frustration if you don't manage to get there.
Yeah, I know the feeling very well, because, I have other podcasts, not only SciLux. And in one of the podcasts, I was interviewing someone where I knew the story was there and he just didn't want to share it. And it's worse. I think sometimes I prefer to be less prepared, because you keep kind of poking instead of just leaving it. It's very difficult to say, okay, let's drop it. Because of course, you know that it would be gold. And sometimes it's not even something personal. It's just telling the story in a way that that would work better than the way they told it. Mm-hmm. Do you do pre-interviews or not?
No. Every question that I have will not be communicated with the guests, just because I think their reaction is much more honest. I think that science people are trained to be challenged every time. So everything they say will be challenged. Everyone tries to prove that they are wrong somehow. And if you do this for 20 years or longer even, then you start to think about every word you say multiple times, and you want to make it the best answer possible, that nobody can say, oh no, you're wrong there, and to shame you in public. So if I give them the questions, they try to come with this perfectly text answer, like they are also lawyers next to being a scientist. And I think that destroys a little bit of that atmosphere that you can create. However, I usually brief them. I say, hey, we do this podcast. It's about you. I don't want to do you any harm. I don't want to challenge you. I just want to understand what you are doing. You don't have to give me the explanation that you give to a Harvard professor. Just talk to me like I'm a 7-year-old kid. And usually then it works.
This is very interesting, very inspiring what you said, that you kind of look at them as people who are constantly challenged. So they're afraid to say something again that will be then questioned. And that's why the answers are like that, because I never thought this way. I rather thought about just not being a trained communicator, and you're more trained about lecturing or just being out, public speaking at a conference. So that's the way people do it. I don't know how often you go to conferences, but I do a lot. And most of the times they just have prepared text that they read out. And honestly, please, right? In your case, if it's a 7-year-old, you're going very much total simplification. And mine is a little bit in between. It requires a lot of preparation, I think.
Yeah, I just say 7-year-old because it gets them usually to laugh a little bit. Of course.
Of course, it's not exactly 7-year-old, right?
But I think that it's very hard to our audience saying Mäin Element audience, to make a big lecture and to simplify the big projects that people are doing and that they want to follow. So I think that's also the big difference. In the end, I think you're much more of a science communicator than I am. For me, in the end, it's entertainment somehow. Entertainment is to get these funny little stories and anecdotes and talk also about science. And I think that's also one reason. As you said with the conferences, I think that's also very true. Not only in science, I think also in companies, that the art of rhetorics is the word in English. I think it's also, at least in German, isn't used that much. So we all see these TEDx videos on YouTube and say, wow, they know they nail every slide on this PowerPoint. And then we watch it and we forget it. And I think everyone can learn. Me too. I should learn it too to get better at this. And I think when you mastered that craft, and some scientists have mastered that craft, obviously, I think you can say anything you want, and you know that it will be perfect.
You definitely have to remember about your audience, and this is extremely important. Whether it's 7-year-old or kind of prepping and saying, okay, well, cool, but probably most of the people who are listening will not get it. So what happens? What do you do with jargon? You get the answer and you don't get it. Do you actually say, please, can we record it again? Because I didn't understand it. I can give you a little bit of theory from science communication. So there are different kind of approaches. You could paraphrase it yourself, right? You could ask actually saying like, this term, can you explain it to me again? Or you could actually just say, well, please repeat. There are different ways that people do it if it's very jargony. What do you do?
I think it's different. Usually I try to understand it and then I ask a similar question. So it goes with the flow and I get another explanation and then I can choose from 2 or 3. One element of our podcast is these small reflections that we do where we have the interview. So for those who haven't listened to the podcast,
is there anybody like that here?
I think
for sure not.
I think
but
there are 5 people. Yes. All the other 3 point whatever billion have listened to the podcast. But if you should be one of these 5 people, usually we do a normal podcast interview like Hanna. But sometimes I make little pauses. So we go out of the interview and I record stuff or re-record stuff where I ask some questions or explain what I thought hearing this answer and why I will ask the next question. And sometimes we also have the situation that the scientist explained something correctly, but it was very hard because there are a lot of complicated words that I cannot reproduce and would also sound like a lecture. And then sometimes we try to use sound effects and other playful elements that we put in these small reflections to explain why something is like it is or what the scientist does in his work. Basically those 2 things, ask another question or put it in these reflection bits to paraphrase it then myself. Yeah,
the reflection bits are a really good tool, I would say. I sometimes wish I could just add it somehow because, I really keep the conversation as it is, which also is important because sometimes the flow, the reflection is good, but it breaks. It breaks, so it actually makes it less heavy, but then again, it breaks. So if you have like a good chemistry between you and the guest, then it's actually good to keep it, right? Even though there are some terms that you completely didn't understand. Often, actually, in my case, but I'm faking it very well, apparently. So still, quantum physics is still not the thing I can fake about, apparently. But this seems, I heard something from one of the scientists, is that if you say you understand it, then you just don't. So I keep saying that, and hopefully I'm going to be fine. You know, in science communication, you have exactly the discussion of jargon, but you also have the discussion of storytelling. The storytelling is so popular now. Sorry, you can probably hear in the voice what I think about it, because I think it's everywhere, you know. It's just like I keep getting courses about storytelling and everybody's talking about it, that you have to employ it, has to be everywhere. What's your approach? What is storytelling for you, and what do you use it, or you don't even think about it this way?
Of course, I use storytelling, but I wouldn't go that far that I say, oh, I take the hero journey and then I do this and that and that. For me, I use storytelling because I know it's a little bit like a song, like a piece of music. And it sounds much more like I would know what a musician does, because I don't. But I like to listen to music. And I think you can't use always the big parts right at the beginning. You can't put them all at the end. I think it has to be a beautiful melody in the end. And that's what I try to do. It sounds very, very idealistic now. Maybe it's storytelling, but it's not that theoretical storytelling that I sit there and think for 3 days, oh, how could I manage to do this? I think most of the things come by themselves.
So it leads to another question I wanted to ask you, how much it is intuition and how much it is planning?
Usually I say it's much more planned than everybody thinks, and it's much less intuition that everybody thinks.
So you have like 7 pieces of paper in front of you when you're interviewing?
No, usually I have one document. I know that I want to ask several questions about the work. I know I want to ask several questions about the person. I want several questions that are more philosophical. And then I try to implement everything when the conversation allows it. But like I said in the beginning, sometimes some anecdotes come by itself and I have to lose half of my questions that I wanted to ask because something else comes up that's so interesting that I didn't know. I had one scientist, for example, we were about talking German grammar. The episode was much more exciting than it sounds when I say German grammar.
I love German grammar. Come on. No, but really, I really mean it, but fair enough.
Then we talked about her past life, and I didn't find anything about the story that she told, that she used to do hats, for example. And I didn't know that this was a job, for example. Yeah, we started talking about hats and her past life and why she chose to do this job and then to leave it to do science and German grammar. So, yeah, and you couldn't find it anywhere. So I think that was very, very, very cool. A very cool moment.
I also think that it shows because you're going to be naturally more interested. So the conversation will be more interesting too, right? It reminds me, I had an interview, one of my favorite actually ever. It was an interview where I had 2 guests and I got a hint from someone else saying like, you need to interview them. And I said, okay, fair enough. And it was around Easter time. And I was supposed to get an article about what they do. I didn't have time to read the article. The article actually was in German. So it took me more time to read it because I'm not so fluent in German as I'm in English. I read it and I was like, well, I'm not getting really what they're doing. I mean, it's a little bit related to what they're doing, but their names are not there. So I was like, okay, this is not cool. I wrote to the person who hinted and, well, holiday time, I didn't get an answer. So this is really not cool. And I do want to go back to the people I scheduled the interview with to say, actually, I don't really know much about you because that would sound really bad. So I said, okay, fair enough. I'll go with the flow. So I kind of Googled more what they could potentially be doing. And I said, I'll see. And then I told them in the very beginning, I said, listen, this is the story. I know you have a story to tell. I just couldn't find as much as I would like normally. And honestly, it went just, of course, they are amazing communicators. So that also helped. But still, it was one of my best interviews because I was just really going for it and way more curious than the usual because I really didn't know the answers.
I think that's also very great. At least I haven't met any person in science that had like this very big ego. I don't know if it will happen soon after I said it now, but I think the guests are very, very kind and also very helpful because they know that it's good what you do and also good for them. So I think they always start on a positive note, even when they haven't heard any podcast before. But what I wanted to ask, you do something that I don't do. You have multiple guests sometimes. How hard is it? Because I know I want to focus on one person. Yeah, I would also be a little scared to don't give as much time as I could give to both of them. And at the end, I will cut 80% of someone else out because the story of the other person would be so good. So you have this, double way of interviewing. So how is it for you?
It is very difficult. And it's not really my choice to have many guests. It's just that sometimes projects need to be promoted by a few people and it makes more sense. The last season that is just finishing, I decided to do also some kind of international projects, which meant that there are scientists based in Luxembourg and someone who is somewhere else. So naturally, we want both or sometimes even 3 people. And it is a huge challenge. Yes, it's good you're asking that because, of course, here I'm not looking for personal stories that need time to develop because that would not work, I think. But it is a challenge on multiple levels. The first one being that sometimes it is, let's say, a PhD student and his or her supervisor. So I never know which questions to address to whom, because it does happen to me that I ask some complex question and the PhD student gets super blocked because the supervisor is listening. So there's that part that kind of, who is in the hierarchy of things. And then also, especially with the international projects, especially right now, the way science is, it's very often interdisciplinary. So I have people from completely unrelated fields. The only thing that links them is that one project they are working on. So it's a mess, I think. I hope my listeners don't think this way because I somehow apparently managed to figure it all out. But there is a moment when I'm thinking, how on earth am I going to jump from this particular subject that we went so deep in, and now I have to ask a question to someone who is a completely different spectrum of the whole thing. It's really difficult, yes. But also very rewarding because you also get this human part of, their cooperation, their respect towards each other. Sometimes it is about exactly just working with a field that they didn't know much about. So you can also see they are a bit of a bridge. They explain things to you, what the others said. No, it's really cool, but it can get very intense and very difficult. I think I'm more tired after that, yeah. But it's a good question, yeah. So if ever you want to start with more people, I can tell you how it goes. Again, it's psychom, so it's more science. So as I said, if you were to link the personal stories, I don't know whether I would be able to do that. But you mentioned before that you don't feel you're doing science communication. So how do you define it and why you don't think you're crossing there? You're still talking about science.
Yeah, because the main goal of the podcast is the person behind the science. So of course, somehow it is science communication. The podcast is a science podcast. The goal is always to promote science to the people. But for me, it's important to say that I'm not a science communicator because I have too much of respect for people who really know what they're doing and also know what I'm doing. But like I said before, much more on the content creator part. And for me, the stories behind it is the main thing in the podcast. And if we combine this, so the idea of creating cool stories of science people, then that people in the end say, oh my God, Luxembourg really does cool science jobs, or maybe even a student that says, oh, I want to go into science because of this, then we reached both of the goals. But the project is a science communication podcast, but I will never say that I'm a science communicator because the communication part I can manage, but the science part will never be my main goal.
It's interesting. You keep coming back to these labels, okay, I'm not a journalist. I'm not a science communicator. And it just reminds me, when I go somewhere and people ask me, so what do you do? And I'm like, oh no, because I know that in my case, first of all, I don't really know what to say because it's very difficult to say so that people will know because many people still don't listen to podcasts. And then if I do, I get silence. Because, if I say I'm a teacher, oh yeah, who do you teach? People know what to say. With that, they don't. So you say you're a content creator? I don't think that people would know either what to say to that.
No, I have the luxury that I can say that I work in the agency business. So I do advertisements as my main job. So usually I can say that. And then some people say, oh, cool, for which clients? Or they say, oh, okay. And then everything is over.
There is that need at certain moment, maybe to connect or whatever. And it's difficult, right? And I do believe that the best people to do science communication or to do similar jobs where you're kind of bridging are the people who are actually not experts in the field, because really then you can't get rid of all the jargon that you have been using for the last 20 years or whatever, right? So you're the right person, for sure.
Oh, thank you very much. That's very kind. You too, first of all.
Exactly. I was waiting for, you have to pay the compliment back, obviously.
Pause was a little bit too long. But I think to come back to the point where I said the best communicators are those who aren't that big in science. I think one part of it is to not challenge the main field of the interviewee. Because, of course, I can challenge them by giving them new aspects to think about, or maybe to ask something that they never thought about, more philosophical way. But if I start by saying, oh, I think you're wrong, it makes a more challenging atmosphere. And I don't think that you want to talk with people who will constantly say that you're wrong. But it's not to criticize them, or that you can't criticize them or ask questions about something if you don't understand it. But I think it's the way of talking to people that will get you the best results.
True. Sometimes I interview someone that I thought was an expert in the field, and then I get the reaction of the scientific community saying like, honestly, like they don't know, they just don't do anything important, whatever. And, I can't choose the guests on the basis of the merit because I just don't know. I mean, I do double checks, triple checks, asking around, reading and whatever. But of course, I'm never an expert, so I can't really know exactly. But it's also not, I really don't think that the guests in my show should be the biggest experts in the field, because they are often not the best communicators. And I still want someone to actually communicate what they're doing.
And in the end, it's not your job. So that's also one thing that you can't forget. It's not your job to prove that what they said is right or wrong. It's your job to interview people, that they get the platform to present themselves. And I think that's also what makes a great host. Because in the end, if every guest that comes to your show and you say, oh, but you're wrong, it isn't good for yourself, but nobody will come to your show because they say, why should I be there? Why do I go to a house and everybody spits in my face? So to be a little bit metaphorical. But yeah, and I think that's the same in TV shows. I wouldn't never go to a TV show where I know that people will not mock me. That would be okay, but not respect me or try to prove that I'm wrong in every point.
But don't you think that, for example, in political interviews, it's all about proving the politician wrong?
No, I don't think it's proving a politician wrong, because at the moment that you are there as a host and you try to prove somebody wrong, you have an opinion. And I think it's not your role to have an opinion. You can challenge them. You can ask, hey, is that what you do right? Or can't we use that much of money that is people's money for something else? Or are you sure this is the most efficient solution? But I think if there's another guest that says, oh, you're wrong, I would do it this way, or we should do it this way, this is okay. But as a host, you are not the one that should have that big of an opinion on things, even if you disagree.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking a lot right now, because recently I've had some opinions from people saying, well, podcasting is all about having an opinion. That people listen to podcasts, to the big stars, because they give their opinions. And I had some criticism saying, you're too neutral, you're too transparent. Mm-hmm. This is great journalistic work. Well, thank you for using that word, whoever was saying it. But in podcasts, you should be more out there. You should be more visible.
I know where this is coming from, this thought. I think it's, of course, I don't want to be rude, But it's a difference if you have an opinion of something that society says, or if Kim Kardashian has an opinion on something.
This is the first time I'm in the same sentence with Kim Kardashian. Thank you so much.
I just thought, who's the biggest star? Or Taylor Swift. So now we have two, because people want to know what those people think. And of course, it's a difference if you have a podcast of Max Kasel or if you have a podcast of Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi, because that's public interest in the end. But I think in our podcast is more, like you said, journalistic work, or to give the platform to other people. I think that's the format that we should go for.
I also think that especially in science, there should be less opinions, rather kind of showing sides or whatever, because I have a problem with the bigger podcasts that have certain advertising, let's say. I understand they have to make money, but there are certain products that are really not scientific and they get advertised in a science podcast. And I think that should not be mixed. Okay, it's a monetized story, but for me, that's also the PR around the person, and certain things should be filtered out. But that's just on my opinion, by the way.
Yeah, I think it depends.
I'm asking a person doing advertisements, obviously. Okay, we're slowly wrapping up. So, of course, the favorites. What was your favorite episode?
I think my favorite episode was... I could be really good teaser. The next one who will come. So it's always the next one.
Or the last one, right? Depends where you are in the promotion, yes.
Yeah. But but to answer honestly, there are really a lot of episodes that I can remember and I will remember forever, because maybe the things I learned, maybe the stories that have been told, maybe sometimes even podcast episodes that the listeners don't think that it's my favorite. It could be my favorite. But one I always mention is the one with Jamila Awada. Did you also already?
Yes.
Yeah, so your listeners know that she's such a great person, such a lovely guest. And yeah, it was a very, very cool episode because we talked about space. We talked about feminism. We talked about role models. And we even got her students to say a few words and to describe Jamila. And now, which is very funny, in the coming season of Mäin Element, we had a podcast with one of her postdocs. And she also mentioned Jamila and her qualities. And it's cool to see that everybody thinks the same about her. I really enjoyed that episode. But like I said, there are many I could say now, but that one was great.
It reminds me of an episode that I had about mentorship in academia in general. That has been pretty popular episode because it's also with two important mentors, and there was a lot of discussion exactly about that. And, there's a FNR for, I think, 2 or 3 years now, has this award as well for the best mentor in academia. So there's definitely more discussion. And it's very cool to see that it comes naturally. So it's not just, okay, yes, well, of course, my boss is my mentor or whatever. You really have those role models in academia. They're extremely important because it's a very difficult environment, isn't it?
I think it's always good to have do you have a mentor?
Me, myself? Mm-hmm. Nope, I don't. Do you?
So I had the chance to have, during different paths of my life, mentors who helped me. And I hope that one day I can help others too. But I don't know how you become a mentor or how you get your mentor. I really thought about how did I got a chance to have these people as mentors, and I don't know.
Yeah, but it's a very good point because you asked me, do you have a mentor? So at this particular moment, I don't, but I could name certain people in my life that definitely were. They also teach podcasting. I do tend to do it more like a coaching thing, that first we have a group meeting and then we actually meet one-to-one. So I feel that I can be a bit of a mentor, and with some cases I'm kind of following the path of the creators that are supposed to launch something. Hello, creators, launch the podcast, by the way, I'm still waiting. But anyway, this is a very organic kind of natural process because it's often not necessarily the person who is very much like responsible, your supervisors, but it's very important to have these people who inspire you. So maybe you don't necessarily call them mentors, but there are people who inspire you, who take you out of your regular path and out of your bubble as well.
Sometimes you even notice it while you're doing some completely different work, and then you do something and you say, oh, that's like my mentor used to do it. Well, that's weird. Like sometimes you say something, oh, my mother would have said the same thing. And then you realize maybe you learned more than you are, or copied more than you want to admit sometimes. And I think it's the same thing with mentors.
Well, this is a bit of a retrospect again question, but do you have a good definition what makes a good interview? Have you found it yet? Because I'm looking for it all the time. Because once again, going back to my, teaching people skills and whatever, of course, you can find courses on that. You have certain definitions. You have people telling you how to do it. But what is it for you? When do you think, oh, this was a good interview?
From which perspective?
From your perspective.
As a host?
Yes.
I'm happy with an interview if I learn something. Maybe in the positive or in the negative, even though the negative parts are harder to swallow. And if the result in the end is somehow that I could live with it, that I'm happy with it, you can have a very, very boring interview with people that are very exciting, usually. And you can have a very great interview with people who, at least at the beginning, seems to be not that exciting, let's say it like that. I usually hate it, for example, when I hear an interview with a celebrity, the most basic example, and I listen to the whole hour, 2 hours, and I haven't learned anything. It's basically the same questions that they did in the 5-minute radio interview or the 13 minutes short podcast or whatever, or the YouTube video. So I think if you notice that the person who wants to interview you really wants to interview you and wants to get to know things about you. Sometimes it doesn't work, of course. And some questions you have to ask every time. You always have to ask, oh, where did you get your inspiration from the album, for example? It's the question that comes naturally and you have to do it for the promo. But I think that's one part. And if you notice that both of the guest and the interviewer or the host is relaxed and enjoys the time, because that's also podcast in the end. In fact, it's a discussion of 2 or 3 people, and the 4th person or 3rd person, whatever the guest number is the one that is sitting silently on the table with the other 2 and listens. I think you notice if 2 people don't want to talk to each other, then the 3rd one will find the time to scroll through their phone and don't listen to anything.
You revealed that you also learn in the negative, as you said.
You always learn in the negative.
So what is it in the negative? In what sense?
Well, if you now find out that the microphones stopped working, I learned that I should check the batteries more often, for example. I think these hard lessons, I try to find the words from a German analogy. I think you notice that the fire is hot once you touched it once. It's not the lesson that everybody wants to do because
Yes.
It hurts, but maybe we have to do it sometimes. And that's what I meant with you can learn from the negative too.
I don't wish it for you, but let's imagine Mäin Element.
But I hope you touch a lot of fire.
No, yeah, of course, all the time. I'm talking about Mäin Element as such. Let's say it stops one day. Do you think you would miss talking about science and you would still want to do something about it? Or is just for you a transitory period? Let's say you're doing it now, but somehow I have a feeling that loads of people who start talking about science or get contact with cool scientists, there is some thrill you get out of it that you want to continue. At least I've noticed that.
I don't know. I really can't say because I don't want to think about it because everything is great as it is right now. I have great partners with whom I can realize this project, who trust me. And I know that sometimes I have ideas that they say, well, okay, this something different, or why do you want to do that? But they trust me and this partnership is great. So yeah, I hope these questions will be answered in about a million years, but not now.
you behave exactly the same way as me with SciLux. It's like, everything's fine, but don't take SciLux away from me. I mean, it's different, obviously, because it's my product. I started it from, what was it, bedroom or whatever, So it's me in a way. Do you imagine yourself, university professor, scientist, because you just now are so impressed with the way scientists work that you see yourself in academia for some reason? Has your approach to science changed from that perspective?
I have one friend, or one of my best friends, who works in academia. So I see it in his private life, what it's like. I have to say, I don't think that I will go to academia. I love talking about it, but it's not my field. I'm happy in the agency life for the moment.
I totally understand that. I know what you mean. You don't have to expand on this. Okay, anything else you want to tell our listeners before we kind of wrap up? Maybe some questions you have for me still, or something you wanted to discuss, you were thinking of?
Usually I hate this question during interviews, but where do you see SciLux in 10 years?
Oh my goodness. Yes, I hate this too. Why are you asking such a question if you hate it? Our listeners will feel it. Well, to be honest, I'm actually finishing season 4. Season 5 is going to start in October, and I have big plans for it. Mm-hmm. It's been quite a while that people have been telling me, well, yes, we are very happy to have you here in Luxembourg and interview Luxembourgish scientists or scientists based in Luxembourg, but why don't you go out? So I think I'm going to try that. And the whole idea is to really focus on European science. So I have a feeling that for science communication, science podcasts, we have amazing things in the States, but not that many in Europe. For sure, UK. I mean, I love UK podcasts, but still, British sense of humor is the best. But still, there is way more room, and I would like it to be really European with European science. So not one country, but very much broad. In Luxembourg, it's a bit easier to choose because the group is small. And right now I have a big list and I have to choose 12 people on the basis of their merit, their communication skills, the science they do. And of course, it's just, it's not one subject. So to kind of have a good balance of countries, people and everything, I need a bit of time to do that. A very atypical pub quiz question for our listeners, nothing related to science, just to eating. Max, can you remind our listeners what the question was and then give us the answer?
Yeah, I thought I do the really hard questions because science is so easy. What food was invented in Luxembourg? Was it the doner? Was it the chicken nugget? Or was it the tortellini? And it was, in fact, the chicken nugget. The chicken McNugget was invented by René Arendt, a Luxembourgish guy.
Wait, what do you mean invented? I mean, people were not doing chicken and breadcrumbs before?
Maybe not in the fritteuse, I don't know. But I just know that the chicken McNugget was invented by some Luxembourgish guy. I think if you Google it, you will find the article. I don't go into his life, but I think Hollywood should film it.
Yes, absolutely.
It was a great contribution to the humankind.
Yes, totally. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Okay, thank you. I don't want to go into the science of, frying things or whatever. But thank you very much for the question. Very interesting. I did not know that. And I'm happy it's not tortellini. My husband is Italian, so he would definitely question it, even if you said it.
Sometimes it's very, very interesting to see the challenges that people have in science, that they have to leave a country to get a job somewhere for 2 years, and then you have to leave again. And
almost like footballers,
Almost like footballer. But I think you get more money as a footballer.
Yeah, most probably, yes. So it depends which league and whatever, but yes.
Also, what does it to families? We spoke about Stefan Bordas, for example. He talked about this in my episode, and I was like, wow, okay. I didn't think that he would speak so openly about this. So, I think sometimes we have to realize that being a scientist is much more than sitting in a library all day and making some glasses explode and say eureka. But the pressure that's on them is very, very hard.
Yes, I really like the fact that you have so much respect for the job, because it's very challenging and it has its very difficult sides for sure. Also the fact that, in our shows, we normally have 1-2 guests, but it's a group effort as well, that we tend to forget, that we just say, okay, yes, that one scientist that gets the Nobel Prize, right? But it's really very often the whole environment that you end up with. And of course it works or it doesn't work too, or you have some big egos in there as well, which doesn't help the thing. And the families, and I'm happy I'm not a scientist, because once in a while people are like, well, you're kind of getting the thing, maybe you should do a PhD. And I'm like, no, I'm very happy where I am, because it really, especially from the PhD perspective, it is really being in the starting blocks and not being sure whether you will ever arrive. So yes, kudos to all of you who are listening. We already established it's not going to be any scientists listening to this. So I don't know who is listening.
If you know someone, high five them.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Max, for coming today. And remember, listeners, that Mäin Element is there for you to discover if you don't know it yet. But new episodes coming. When is the next one?
Every month there will be an episode, and the next season will start next month. So if you're listening in September, I think October will be your month.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And this is it for today. Thank you for listening. Remember to subscribe, to follow us, to suggest guests. If not, just, shout out and say hello. And this was SciLux, and my name is Hanna.